A number of people have been conned when they were trying to purchase land, be it in Kenya or whichever place. Now, there are a number of things that we need to know, to get to know from the word go. If you're planning to acquire land, whether it's through inheritance, buying, or whichever process that is legal when it comes to acquisition of land, so that you don't find yourself in a place where you've acquired land and later on it actually has issues. So in this particular video, we're going to talk about some of the issues you're likely to face in the process of acquiring land. And also we'll talk about some of the things that you must do in the process of acquiring land. Now, if you're new here, my name is Samuel. This channel is called Africa Farming. We're focused on new generation farmers and new entrants in farming who are willing to learn new farming practices. So you can take a second or two to subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified whenever we upload and release a new video. Now, there are a number of issues that you're likely to face in the process of acquiring land. It's just normal. It's called the system. In Kenya, we call it the system. Whenever you want to acquire land, the process has to go through the government, because government is in charge of, change of use or transfer of ownership of land. So regardless of the process that you want to use in acquiring land, whether it's through inheritance or you've been gifted, you have to still go through government in order for you to legally acquire that land. So some of the issues that you might face is, number one, corruption. In Kenya, you have to sometimes pay one or two people for the process to maybe move faster, or, to facilitate. It's called facilitation. But one thing that you need to notice is, let's say you want to acquire land. There are fraudsters within the government who would want to be bribed. Cases of missing documents, we've heard of these cases in courts and all that. So there is corruption. You need to understand that. Whenever you're acquiring land, just know that you might encounter corrupt officials, especially in government offices. Then another issue that you might also face is weak systems, especially in government.
At the Records Registry, it is easy to see why it takes time to access files. Over 3 million files, some decades old, are stored in here.
You can see it is not numbered, so that you know what you're going to look for here.
Charity Ngilu was the Minister of Lands in the first era of Jubilee government. She tried to digitize the whole process of land acquisition. But when she was charged with some corrupt cases and left the ministry, that whole process was left and abandoned. So basically, the slow adoption of technology in the Ministry of Lands has actually made systems in that particular ministry very weak. So you'll find that because of that, you'll find there are so many issues in that ministry, and you really need to be very careful when you're handling that process of transfer. So it's always good to have a lawyer in place to handle that for you because of those weak systems. So another issue that you might actually, maybe you might not know, but it's very good for you to know, there's what we call law of adverse possession. Now, what this basically means is there are most people who buy land and wait for it to appreciate, right? Which is good. It's a good thing. They always say land is an investment and all that. But one thing you need to know is that if you buy land and let's say you are far away and there are squatters who come to stay in that land as you wait for the land to appreciate, after 12 years, let's say you don't always go to visit your land or your farm or wherever it is that it will be. Let's say you're working abroad and you come back after 15 years or what years, and you've never even sent somebody to come and see that land. If the squatters have been there for 12 years, trust you me, that land will not belong to you.
In his life and times, McTaw owned and managed the lands, albeit in dispute. In his death, he has lost the battle to Sirikwa squatters.
So make sure when you're in the process of buying your land, at least you know where your land is located, number one, because most people buy land and they don't even know. They just buy for the sake of buying. So know where your land is located. Know who the people around that place are, because if they start occupying that land as squatters and maybe they know you're never close, you never come to visit your farm, trust me, you'll have bought that land and your money will go after 12 years because the government gives you 12 years. So if you don't come visit your land, squatters will take over that particular piece of land. So be careful. Now, another thing that you need to understand is that in Kenya today, most people are buying land based on speculation and not the actual price of the land. So you need to actually do your due diligence. Go to the field, Look for your neighbors around, ask them what the market price of the land is and all that before you make that purchasing decision. Because sometimes you'll be told, maybe you're in Nairobi and you want to buy land, for example, in Namanga or somewhere very far from Nairobi. So the people around Nairobi who are selling you, maybe the land selling agents, it's maybe a company that is selling the land on behalf of the owner or wherever, they'll actually come to you and tell you this land is located near this school, near this university, and maybe this university will be built after 25 years. Yeah, so they'll use marketing language to spruce up, and make sure that that land becomes, I don't know how to put it, but the marketing language that most people use. So don't buy land based on speculation. They'll tell you the value of the land is this, in the next 5 years it will be this. It's always good to go to the ground, ask around the whole area, the neighbors around there, how much land goes, so that by the time you make that purchasing decision, you're not making that decision based on speculation. Another thing that you also need to consider is what we call due diligence. And this is the most important thing when it comes to acquisition of land. Due diligence basically is the research that you do behind the scenes. So there's what you call land search. You have to make sure that you go and search. For example, if you're going to buy, for example, an acre of land, you need to go to the Ministry of Land and do what we call land search. And this land search will be able to tell you whether the owners that you are told are the owners are actually the legal owners of the land. It will tell you whether that land has issues in terms of maybe somebody, there are rates that have not been paid and all that, clean documents, or whether there are issues to do with that piece of land. So never go and buy land before you do that land search, because you might be sold land that has a lot of pending rates. Right now there are places where you have to pay rates and all that. So make sure you go and do your land search. It's just general due diligence. Get a lawyer to help you do that. It's always advisable also to buy your land through land selling agents, because they've already done the due diligence. But as a matter of just knowledge, it's always good to do your own due diligence. Get a lawyer to tell you what the process of due diligence is, the land search, how long it will take. It's a tiresome process, but it is valuable, because at the end of the day, it will save you a lot of money. Another thing you might need to consider is land use. Before you buy any piece of land, make sure, as you're doing your due diligence, make sure you know what type of use that land is reserved for. Because you might be buying land that is, maybe you intend to do residential houses and all that, but in the end, you do your due diligence and find, for example, those people who bought land without doing due diligence, and this land was reserved for agricultural use, then you end up going to purchase a lot of, construction materials and bringing to the farm, to the land, with the intention of doing apartments or residential buildings. Then somebody comes and tells you, hey, this is agricultural land where you can't do A, B, C, and D. So it's good that you understand the land that you're buying. Is it for agricultural use? Is it for residential? And all that. It's always good to know the type of land use before you make that purchasing decision. Another thing that you need to understand, and this is very important, is the transaction obstructions. What this basically means is somebody might tell you this land is, for example, 1 million shillings. Always put in mind that you're not going to pay 1 million shillings only. There are those transaction fees that will always come up. For example, you have to hire a lawyer. A lawyer will charge you some amount of money. When you're doing your due diligence, especially with regards to land search and all that, there is a cost element involved in that. If, for example, you've involved brokers, or somebody who got that land for you is a broker or an agent, they'll also need their cut. So when land is valued at 1 million shillings, just know that you're not going to pay 1 million, you're going to pay 1 million plus, right? Another thing is you also need to understand what process are you using to buy the land or to acquire the land. Are you going to buy in cash? Are you using a bank? Or is it an inheritance, for example? What I always recommend is, even if you have the cash, I would always recommend that you go through a bank. Just go to a bank, because one thing that a bank would always give you the advantage of is the due diligence. Banks and financial institutions always carry out perfect due diligence. So by the time you're acquiring that land through the bank, you already know that this land is clean. Even if you have the cash, it's always good to pay that extra fee to the bank, that will actually help you get clean land, as opposed to buying cash and then you end up having to, sort out issues later that you had not, thought about. So it's always good to either use the bank or a land selling agent because they carry good due diligence. But when it comes to land selling agents, be very, very careful. Get their tax number, get their registration certificate, get all details you need basically with regards to that particular company. I'm not saying all land selling agents, all land selling companies have issues, but I've met one, especially there's a plot of land I bought somewhere in Kenya that until today I've never even had access to that particular piece of land. And if we go back to the land selling company, they keep giving you stories and stories and stories. So be very, very careful when selecting the land selling company that you trust to, to take you through this process of acquisition of land, because there are some that have come up these days that are of doubtful, their profile is kind of doubtful. You might end up buying land and not owning it. Now, some of the things that I would advise that you do, for example, is, as I've already told you, go to that piece of land, go to the surrounding neighbors and all that. Just inquire who the owner is, how the history of that particular piece of land. Are there any issues, any family squabbles? Because all these things would actually bring issues later on if you don't go and ask. So it's always good to go and interview neighbors around that particular piece of land. Now, if, for example, you have gone to the ground and found that the piece of land, for example, is 1 million shillings, and then the guy who, let's say the agent or the broker was telling you the land is 500,000, you also need to create a question mark. Make sure you do your perfect due diligence, because that is the key to acquiring that land legally and without issues later on. Because once you do that, then you avoid a lot of legal issues that might stem from not doing or carrying out that due diligence. Yeah. And a very important thing is if you want to acquire land and this land is owned by family or a couple, for example, and the person who's coming to sell to you is one of the parties, it's always good to make sure that you get consent from the other parties. So if it's a couple and it's the lady who's come to sell the land to you, make sure you get consent from the guy. If it is the guy, make sure you get the consent from the lady. If it's family, make sure you get consent from that whole family that they agree to sell that land. Because one person might go and sell that land, and later on, the whole family or the other spouse, if it's a couple, the other spouse might come and, claim ownership to the land. And they can even go and block the whole process, yet you might have actually paid money. So make sure that you get consent when it comes to land that is owned by more than one party. Make sure you get consent, and that consent will help you a lot in making sure that you own that piece of land legally. So I hope that you've understood one or two things about this whole process of acquiring land. I didn't want to go into details, but there are people who've been conned and scammed, and there are many. Personally, I think I have by a land selling company. I will not say which one, but it's good that at least I've learned the whole process, and it's good that you also get to learn that process. So to those people who've been watching our videos, we want to thank you so much for watching. Take a second or two to subscribe, because we've seen through our statistics that most people who watch our videos have not subscribed. So if you're one of those people who've not subscribed and are watching this video now, kindly take a second or two, subscribe, hit that notification bell today, and make sure you're one of our subscriber base. And I hope we'll be learning these things together. As I said, Africa Farming is a channel where we learn things daily together. This whole process, we don't know most of the things. We are learning step by step as we get to encounter all these things. So for those people who've subscribed, thank you, thank you, thank you. Continue watching. Thanks for the support. And I want to appreciate the feedback we get. We've gotten a lot of feedback from you guys, and I hope that we'll implement some and, some of those things that you've told us. So until next time, changamka na ukulima.